Good morning. My name is Blair Williams, and I am here at the Cumberland County Historical Society today with Holly Hoffman. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Today is May 21st, 2021. And so I usually start off just by asking to provide a little background. So, Holly, where were you born and where have you lived?
I was born in scenic Deer Park, Maryland, near Deep Creek Lake. And we moved to northeastern Ohio when I was a year old, stayed there till I was 14, moved to central Florida, stayed down there until I graduated from medical school, and then interviewed in 10 different places in the northeastern United States and landed in Carlisle. And I've been here ever since.
When was that you ended up arriving in Carlisle?
I officially started working here August 19th of 1985.
Okay.
I actually celebrate that anniversary annually.
And basically, you said you were interviewing in the Northeast. Is that family, or that's just you were sick of Florida?
I have no real attachment to Florida. It's way too hot and humid for my tastes. Way too many reptiles and insects, so I wanted to get back up into the Northeast, and it's the geography and climate that I prefer.
Okay. Do you have family in the area as well, or?
I landed in Carlisle. The only reason I interviewed here in the first place is I do have an aunt and uncle on my mother's side here in town, or at least it did. My uncle has since passed, but my aunt is still here.
Okay. What were their names?
Bill and Ginger Brennan.
Okay.
My uncle was a pharmacist here in town for many years. My aunt had a library degree, but worked primarily for Habitat for Humanity for a good number of years as a volunteer.
So, just going back a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about sort of any early childhood disasters or dreams?
So the formative disaster that really prompted us to leave Maryland was the school bus collision in Garrett County, Maryland, that occurred in September 10th, 1959. Yeah, that sounds like forever ago.
Yep.
And I was not very old at the time. I was a whopping, almost 5 months old. But my brother was on that school bus and was one of 7 children killed in that accident, which obviously impacted our family immensely. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure for a while my mom totally lost it, and I was raised by strangers for a while.
Yeah.
And then it was just a place, if you have a big trauma like that, people don't tend to hang around in that spot and leave. So that's when we moved to northeastern Ohio. My dad had some friends there, and we moved up to North Madison, Geneva area of Ohio.
And then you gave me some documents related to that, and your brother's name was Lee then?
Yeah, Lee Hoffman, and he was 11 at the time he died.
Did your parents ever talk about him or about the tragedy more?
It's a really interesting thing that happens. It's like this elephant in the room.
Yeah.
You were not allowed to talk about it. If you brought it up, it was quickly shut down. Years later, my sister and I held a memorial it ended up being the 45th anniversary of that accident, and put a memorial in near the site. And we were searching for things related to my brother. And we had always thought that, it was my dad it was actually my mother's stepson, and we thought it was my dad that was kind of hiding things and shooting things down. And here it had been my mom all along. She would try to throw stuff away that reminded her of Lee. And then my dad would find it in the garbage, and he had a little box that he just kept putting all this stuff in as she tried to get rid of it. And turned out he had kept it all. And we were able to retrieve a whole lot of items from Lee's life for that memorial. So it was actually very good.
And you said you were all of 5 months old at this point.
Right.
So, you have...
So this is secondhand knowledge, and it was really fun at the memorial to get to meet other people that had been on the bus and survived, firsthand witnesses to the accident. It was basically the school bus was in the middle of the track, had an engine stall out, and the bus driver hopped out thinking he would repair the engine because there was no train coming at that point in time. And then when the train sounded its whistle and started to approach, they didn't have time to get all the kids off the bus. there were not those drop-down railroad crossings at that time. And actually that accident became the impetus for a whole lot of the safety features both at railroad crossings and on school bus. The whole back exit door thing came out of that accident, so it ended up having positive impact going forward from that point in time.
Well, I'm just thinking, I mean, every time I rode a school bus, every time they approached a railroad crossing, they would stop, they would open the door to listen.
Right. And that really all probably came out of that accident. It was, I don't want to go into some of the more barbaric details, but it was, it traumatized the whole community. I even have a telegraph, from the governor of Maryland to my parents, in that archive of things that we recovered. So, yeah, it was, again, your whole life kind of forms around an event that you really don't have any direct recall of. But the other fun thing, though, you mentioned was dreams.
Yeah. Well, yeah, different note.
I'm going to deflect to dreams now. One of my very favorite television shows when I was a little kid was this show called Doctari. And it was around a veterinarian that worked in Africa in a compound. And he had Clarence the Cross-Eyed Lion. And people in my vintage who watch this video will remember that show. Just totally loved it, ate it up, was very interested in animals. Most of my early life I wanted to be a veterinarian. So fast forward to 2009, I started working with a pastor down in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and we formed a mission to Africa and went to a friend of his in eastern Kenya named Joshua Machinga. He has an orphanage and school there. And as the doctor there doing some medical mission work, the Swahili word for doctor being Daktari, all of a sudden that early childhood memory of Daktari, now I'm getting called Daktari.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to kind of connect those two things when it first occurred to me, hey, wait, that used to be my favorite television show, and now I'm getting called that. So it's amazing how things in your life will reverberate into your past and future will connect at some points. It's full circle.
Well, so this is kind of not Cumberland County, but I'm wondering what church in Emmitsburg, Maryland?
So it is Elias Lutheran Church in Emmitsburg.
Okay.
Pastor John Greenstone there actually had done his vicarship, which is like an internship, up here at St. Paul in Carlisle.
Okay.
And he and I had worked together on Bible school and a few other projects then. And when he had met Joshua when he was still Farmer John, and when he became a pastor, Joshua had said, well, you need to bring a team over here. And I was the logical person because I could kind of bring the medical part and he could bring more of the churchy part. And we went on our first trip in 2009, but we have gone on a total of 4 trips. So we went in 2009, 2011, 2014, and 2018.
Well, the reason I ask is my wife is from just outside Emmitsburg.
Okay.
And so, she and her family have been involved with the church there. Tom's Creek United Methodist
I know
Church.
Tom's Creek, and actually one of our recurring volunteers is from Tom's Creek Methodist Church as well, Phyllis.
Oh, yeah. So that's the reason I was wondering, just because it's a church that I got married in, actually. So.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
So this is that small world thing, which happens over and over again in Carlisle.
Yeah.
Carlisle's and we also said that about Emmitsburg, because actually Dr. Bill Curry here, who is the oral surgeon, one of the oral surgeons in town, his wife is from Emmitsburg. And Bill has been with me on 2 of those trips to East Africa. So, and there was a lot of intersectionality through Emmitsburg as well. So we've always said that Carlisle and Emmitsburg are the centers of the universe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're just proving that point further here today.
Yep.
So you mentioned that your early childhood dream was to be a veterinarian. So I'm wondering, how did you end up not still in the medical field but not as a vet?
Yeah, as you get to be in your later high school years and you start to look a little closer at reality, I realized that it's actually harder to get into veterinary school, and the reimbursement scene is not as good. And so I started to think, well, what is things that also interest me? So as I tell all my veterinary friends, because my vets and I are pretty good friends and we compare notes on what our job duties are all the time and how we treat various things, I said I kept with veterinary medicine. I just decided to specialize in one species of small mammal, children.
Sure.
So, and one of my partners, Dr. Deborah Robinstein, also had wanted to be a vet when she was younger. So I think a lot of people in pediatrics kind of share that past passion.
Okay. Well, I mean, so I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about your own children then.
My own children are, it's very hard for me to say words like, oh, my baby is 26 years old. My daughter Marie, who lives in Pittsburgh and works for IKEA, she's 26, just turned that way last week, so actually earlier this week. We are actually having this interview on what was her due date, May 21st. She shared my passion for animals. We did a lot of wildlife rehab as she grew up. She temporarily was a veterinary technician out in Pittsburgh, but like myself realized that there was not a whole lot of future in that. Switched over to retail. She has always loved design. She had the IKEA catalog memorized before she left high school. And I was kind of browsing one day on my computer and saw that there was a mid-level management, kind of a low-level management position opened up in IKEA, and I said, hey Marie, apply for this, and she did, and she got the job, and she has been there ever since. Loves the job, loves the work culture there. I don't think I will ever pry her out of Pittsburgh or IKEA. Right now doing something else she really loved in childhood was art and design, so she's actually helping design kitchens and living rooms and storage and all that fun stuff. So that's her story. My son is named Ryan. He lives currently in Enola. And he wandered around right after he left high school, tried college at Shippensburg. That was not for him. Worked for a while with my cousin down in West Virginia and in Maryland, and ultimately did end up back in Pennsylvania. Got married. Oh gosh, he and Dominique got married 4 years ago, and are living and working in the Harrisburg area, both of them. He works for overnight office. She is currently working for Penn State Health. So.
Well, I'm just thinking, and we've been joking here at the Historical Society a little bit about sort of the folklore about the well that is getting a new sign, about how, you drink the waters of Carlisle and you inevitably end up coming back. So you might be surprised with your daughter there in Pittsburgh.
I don't know, unless there's an IKEA opens up closer to Carlisle.
Sure.
I think she's pretty dug in there, and she likes it. Carlisle's Pittsburgh is a great place too. I really enjoy going to visit her there. It's got a lot. It's like a collection of small towns that just kind of happened to build up around a little river port there. So.
Now, what school district did your children attend?
Oh my daughter was solidly South Middleton. By that point in my life, by the time she was born, I was settled and I stayed in the same house, and she lived in the same house her whole childhood.
Okay.
My son, when I moved here, there was no such thing as daycare, believe it or not. That was kind of invented right around the time he started school. So he started his life actually at Bethel Christian Academy, which is now Carlisle Christian Academy. Went to school there for a while. We moved houses and schools. He was temporarily up at Bel Air for a while, then at Grace Baptist for a while, did a year at Trinity, and then ended his high school career out at South Middleton also. So he was all over the map. We had the whole sampler of Carlisle schools.
Okay. But yeah, so both of them were bubblers then at the end.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of most of the interviews, probably unsurprisingly, have been actually maybe a little bit surprisingly Big Spring and Carlisle. So I don't know if I've interviewed too many people with, but South Middleton.
All over the map too. So again, I like to keep things interesting. I'm not somebody who likes to get bored. Let's put it that way. So
Sure.
I keep my whole life interesting.
Okay. So, I mean, we just talked about how you ended up in South Middleton, but how did you originally come to Carlisle? You talked about it a little bit with the
Right.
job, but
Interviewing with various practices. So I interviewed with the 10 different practices, and I think I went as far west as South Bend, Indiana. And I knew I wasn't going to stay there. The minute I got the airplane, there is more change in elevation in this carpeting than there is in South Bend. It is the flattest place on the planet. Like, oh, no, I can't do this. I'm not a plains person. I need some mountains. I need some, waterways, stuff like that. Interviewed up in New England area. It just wasn't my cup of tea. It was really despite, in addition to having my aunt and uncle in town, it also was my favorite spot geographically. It had the right climate, the mountains, things to do outside. I really enjoy some of my other hobbies in hiking and photography. So this provides ample opportunity to do that. And it's close enough to bigger places. You can be in New York City in 4 hours, and DC in 2, Baltimore in an hour and 3/4. Yeah, I mean, you can go all over the map here. So you have the advantage of being in a small town, and yet you're close to a lot of other stuff. So I really kind of liked. I'm pretty happy with my choice because I'm still here.
Now, I don't know if this is correct, but I think I remember hearing that in terms of like medical practices, it's a little bit weird because you end up actually making more in more rural locations than you do in, say, like the big city, just because that's where everyone wants to be. Is that a factor at all in terms of where you're interviewing, or?
No, financially. In fact, when I started working here, I made, I think it was like $40,000 a year. It was not. I mean, that was $1985 too.
Yeah.
But financially, pediatrics is not lucrative. We are way down there at the bottom of the income scale with the family practice doctors and the psychiatrists. So, income was not it. It was where I wanted to live, where I wanted to raise kids, really determined where I settled.
And then, so what was your first job here in Carlisle then?
The same job I have now. I
Okay.
took a position with Carlisle Pediatric Associates, and I have stayed there ever since. When I first joined it, it was Dr. Lynn Hoffman and Dr. Steve Krebs. We incorporated Dr. Elias Rosario after that, then Deb Robinstein, then Dr. Waters, then Teresa Frank, and the men have all since retired. So I went from being the first full-time practicing female physician in Carlisle, believe it or not. There were other ones here practicing that were part-time, but I was the first full-time one.
Yeah.
To, gosh, we can't even find men to employ in a pediatric practice. We were told by one recruiter that male pediatricians are just not something that's coming out of the pipeline anymore. So now we're an all-female group. So yeah, a lot of shifts in the culture of medicine.
Yeah.
That being among them. But
Yeah, I imagine going back to your earlier comment about just how it's just not as well compensated.
probably.
To some extent,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, when the men do pediatrics, they tend to go into the subspecialties, which do to have a little higher income associated with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, just that, I think it's the same, with teaching over the years where, kind of that as women became more teachers, I mean, the
Right.
wages just stagnated,
Stagnated.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Although, one of my critiques of our culture is that corporate income has gone up and wages for people that actually do the work are stagnated. So
Sure.
that's not part of this discussion, but
Well, so you mentioned that, it sounds like everyone else who has been practicing with you has since retired, if you're...
all the original ones have retired, yes.
So, I mean, you've been there for, as you said, over 35 years now. I'm wondering if you could talk about, some of the things that, you really enjoyed that have kept you there for 35 years.
So I don't understand the current mentality. The current statistics say that a physician will stay in one job for 2 to 5 years. Like, why would you keep moving around like that? The whole joy to me of this profession is getting to know the families and developing this trusting relationship with them that becomes longitudinal. And especially around Carlisle, where there's a pretty dug-in population that never goes anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm taking care of, I call them grand patients. Patients of mine that have grown up, had children of their own, still come to me, and I even have 1 or 2 great-grand patients at this point. So, yeah, the whole point and joy of the job is those long-term relationships you establish with people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't understand moving around a lot. Well, I actually do have a little insight into that, because you used to be able to not go into 6 digits of debt going to college and medical school. And I think these people come out of here now with $250,000 of debt, and they really do have to look at the financial piece a whole lot more closely than I ever did.
Well, you mentioned that you don't like being bored. And so I'm wondering how you manage to stay engaged and not bored doing the same job for 35 years.
So the fun part of the job is no 2 children have the same personality, no 2 family dynamics are alike. So the innate nature of pediatrics, it stays interesting just by who people are and how children grow and change over the years, and getting to watch them graduate. I get invited to a lot of high school graduations. I get invited to so many high school graduations, actually, that I can't really attend them all. Yeah. So I have to really pick and choose. I get invited to weddings. You know, it's that longitudinal relationship and watching all that change. So the job itself is never, ever boring.
Well, but I imagine, too, it's changed pretty significantly over 35 years in terms of, you know, what you do, how you do it.
Business aspect. In other words, there's what you do, taking care of patients, and then the behind-the-scenes part that the patients don't really see directly, because you know, we are an independent practice. We are one of those dying species. You'll find actually most pediatric practices tend to be independent practices, because we all love it for the same reason and want to control how we do things and stay in that same spot for that longitudinal relationship, which you're not going to be getting out of these big healthcare systems. So as an independent practice, though, you are also a small business. You got bills to pay, you've got utilities, the cost of vaccines, which is astronomical. Yeah. So you have a small business management, and couple that with the changes we've seen in medicine. So when I came here as pediatricians, and we had the small community non-for-profit hospital, and we covered the hospital nursery, a pediatric floor, and our office. So the way the practice was structured, when it was the 3 and then 4 of us, with the men and I, we would make rounds at the hospital in the morning. There was an on-call doctor who saw sick calls in the office, but was also on duty to zip over to the hospital at the drop of a hat if there was a delivery issue, you know, sick baby, something like that happened, big emergency in the emergency room. So we all made rounds in the morning, went down to the cafeteria, had coffee, went over to the office, started the office hours kind of later, like at 9 o'clock, 9:30, something like that. I don't even remember, it's been so long ago. And then went back to the hospital. The on-call doctor would go back. Because there was no urgent cares, after hours things, we actually saw in the emergency room. You were allowed to do that. There was not this property idea of patients and whose they were, and, you know, the hospital didn't claim them for reimbursement purposes. We just, you know, they'd pop into the emergency room, they'd register them, we'd see them there, and that would be our patient in the emergency room. Does not work in the current corporate medical culture at all, but while the hospital was still non-profit, that's how we did things. You know, you were on duty all night, so you get called out for emergencies regularly in the middle of the night. If there was a blizzard, you parked your body in the hospital because it was too hard to come and go from the hospital, from your office or your house, so you just kind of lived in the building until your shift was done, your 24-hour coverage shift. So, and it changed. In 2001, the hospital was sold to a for-profit corporation, changed hands now a number of times, you know, from one corporation to the next, and then the hospital systems started taking over and conglomerating and, you know, culminating in us becoming Pinnacle and then UPMC Pinnacle, and now that's all strictly UPMC. So through the years, as we improved our care for things like diabetes and asthma, we actually didn't need to have a pediatric floor anymore. I think I was department chairman at the time, and I counted back and I said, we have only admitted it was less than 20 kids across the entire year. And it was getting harder and harder to keep good pediatric nurses trained to do that job because it's really different than adult medicine. So we made the decision, that's probably been 12 years ago, that we decided we just can't keep this pediatric floor open anymore. We'll just send all our kids that are sick enough to be in the hospital over to what was then Harrisburg Hospital or to Hershey. And then proceed a couple more years, and the men are all retiring. And it's a very different thing to be on duty for all day in an office, then all night in a nursery, and then part of the next day in the office. It's different to do that when you're 30-something versus when you're now 50-something. So we girls were aging, the men were all retiring, and we said, we need to get out of this nursery business. So about 5 years ago, we stopped doing hospital medicine at all, and now we're strictly outpatient in the office. And this is going to sound like a weird thing to say, but after 30 years of doing work a lot at night, I had to learn how to sleep.
Yeah.
It was not a skill I had used in 30 years. So actually sleeping through a whole night was something I actually had to relearn. And it took a couple of months. Which sounds odd to people who've never lived that way, but...
No, I can imagine it.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking a little bit how the job has changed. What are some of the positive or other positive and negative aspects that sort of shifted over the years?
Well, I certainly have not appreciated at all the corporatization of medicine.
Yep.
In my early years, where it was a community hospital, non-for-profit, and we have remained independent, it was literally the practice of medicine, taking care of people.
Mm-hmm.
It has gradually shifted to the business of medicine, and I almost feel like my current job, where you have all this data entry into a stinking computer screen, you spend at least as much time looking at a screen as you spend looking at people, that I am more of a well-trained data entry clerk than a physician. On the other hand, the advances in pharmaceuticals have made the actual pharmaceutical care of people a better thing. So, I think people enjoy better overall health, but at the expense of the physician-patient relationship.
Which is what, you said it earlier as being the part about the job that you really enjoy,
exactly.
is that sort of relationship over time.
Am I looking forward to retiring in another couple of years? Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm kind of almost counting the months, so it's gotten to that point.
Well, I imagine, especially this last year, hasn't made things...
The pandemic has really, it upended life for pretty much everybody. We had to invent telehealth on the fly. We went from... The Monday after the lockdown started, came and said, we really need to develop telehealth, to having it operational by Friday.
Oh, wow.
So we got that up and running really quickly. There was a learning curve to learning how to do that. We finally became a vaccination site just a couple weeks ago because they didn't let the doctors start giving vaccines, which is the weirdest thing to me. In a preventive health specialty where a huge amount of what we do is preventive medicine and vaccines, to have the government, both federal and state, tell us, well, you don't really know how to do vaccination. Like, huh? What planet are you living on?
I was going to say, I think I got most of my vaccines as a child, so...
Yeah, we are absolutely very, very good at it. We have to pay for these $8,000 medical grade refrigerators with a continuous temperature readout that alarms in your house if it goes out of range and somebody has to come into the office, throw all the vaccines in a cooler and take it over to the hospital. We have more state-of-the-art vaccine than they ever even dreamed about, but somehow we didn't know about that.
Well, so was that shift, you said Monday to Friday you got telehealth up and running. Was that complicated by the fact that you were independent? Or was it made easier?
Actually made much easier because
Okay.
you're only doing it for the people that are in your building and your practitioners. So we didn't have to do something system-wide across several hospitals and multiple owned practices. So actually, that made us much more nimble, I think, than the big practices that work for like Penn State Health and places like that.
Do you think you'll go back to, or do you think that's something now that you'll always offer?
I think telehealth is here to stay. I don't think you'll ever be able to pull that back. It works really well for a number of things. Skin rashes, people that are on vacation in another state can still be seen by their own primary care doctor via telehealth. If they have their cell phone with them, you're good. Behavioral health things where you're really doing more talk medicine than anything physical. And we do a whole lot of behavioral health with depression, anxiety, ADD, that kind of stuff. So that all lends itself. Kids that have gone off to college can still kind of do their behavioral health and talk about concerns that they're having with other medical issues from afar. So I think telehealth is here to stay, and I think it was actually a good addition. It's one of the silver linings of the pandemic.
Well, that's something that's interesting you brought up, because I know my wife is someone who saw her pediatric physician, I think, until she was like 21. And I was, on the other hand, I stopped seeing mine, I think, at a fairly early age. So what is the range of ages that you treat?
So you have just fallen into one of my truisms, by the way, because it is, the girls get really bonded to their physician, and yeah, we basically have to tell them, listen, you're getting married next month, you're expecting a baby, you really need to find a grown-up doctor because you can't be a kid and have a kid at the same time. And the guys are out of there pretty early, they're mostly out of there at 16 when the internal medicine practices will take them. So technically my job description is pediatric and adolescent medicine.
Okay.
And so from birth all the way up to when you graduate college. Now, we have to put kind of an age limit on it because some people who go to graduate school think they can still sneak in. They're like, no, you're an adult now.
Yeah.
So technically up until age 22.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess my wife wasn't the outlier that she
was not an
made
outlier.
made herself out
Pretty
to be.
typical of a female.
Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned that you're thinking about or about to retire in a few months or a year or two. So,
more like 3, but yeah.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, what advice would you give to someone who's just now starting out?
I understand that you have phenomenal amounts of debt, but some things money just can't buy, and one of them is those longitudinal relationships with patients that you will value, that you will be part of their extended family and invited to their weddings. And I have one patient that invited me not just to her wedding, but to sit at the table, with her family, because that's how close we were. So you just can't trade that for money. Money isn't everything. And being independent is a fabulous job because you get to control everything about your life. The hospital corporations lure people in with a lot of lucrative contracts, but then they start pulling all the lucrative stuff out and making the work more and more, and that's why people leave after 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So you got to look at both sides of the coin.
Do you find that a lot of the new physicians coming into your office is that something that you look for? Is someone who you think is going to stick around for a while? Or?
Absolutely, 100%. Now, again, because we are an independent practice, we don't have the big financial backing. We can't offer those huge deals initially that the hospitals do. So a lot of them will go to the hospital-based practices because we just don't have that kind of money. We actually have to work with like years of my hospital checkbook and not this big business kind of model of kind of debt leveraged against future income and stuff like that. So, but again, the advantage of that is complete control over your life. And I'm not gonna sell out. We have, amongst the girls, we've decided we are never gonna sell out to a hospital corporation.
Now, how many people, are they all partners or they're associates?
So we have 3 full partners in the practice, 1 employed physician and 1 employed physician assistant.
And the rest of them are
and everybody else is ancillary staff, MAs and
Okay.
business office staff.
And those, these are all, I'm assuming people who've been there for a long time. So, you also get those
Everybody that's
relationships?
there right now has came there and stayed there.
Yeah.
And it's the culture. And I think when people come to interview, if that staying in one spot makes them nervous, they're not going to look twice at us. For some people, staying in one spot is attractive, and then they will. So.
Yeah.
And we always, at the end of the day, every time we've recruited for new partners, the right person has come along. And when they're a fit, and it works.
Do you find it's people who are, broadly speaking, who are from the area, or, are you pulling in from all over the place?
A little of both. Most people are from the area. I'm one of the ones that was not from the area.
Yeah.
Dr. Waters came back because she had family here. Her parents were here and getting older. Dr. Deb grew up down in Gettysburg area, Hanover.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Frank is from all over the place because she was with the military, so she's been here, there, and everywhere. Diana Rudy grew up in the Moore State College, went to school in the Moore State College area, so our PA.
Well, so kind of shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned earlier doing some mission work in Kenya, but I'm also seeing here that you at some point decided to pursue a master's degree in theology.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that decision come about?
At some point along my career path, I realized that while my medical training had prepared me to deal with strictly medical aspects, a lot of what I deal with, especially with adolescents, is more not just behavioral health, but life events and how to handle kind of spiritual and kind of existential crises, maybe. Would that be a good word?
I'm assuming a lot of adolescents experience those.
So the impetus was initially to just go take this course that they offered down at what was then Gettysburg Lutheran Seminary in pastoral care and counseling. I figured, okay, get a little background in counseling that kind of coheres with my spiritual upbringing and beliefs. And I went down there, and this is a for real experience. I am not making this up. I went to my first session of this class, and I went to put my foot out of the car, and it was like this electrical surge through my foot, and I actually remember bringing my foot back in and doing it again. I'm like, wow. And I had no clue what that meant, but it just kind of sucked me in, and then I kind of got addicted to the whole idea of kind of the spirituality in life, and kind of decided to pursue a degree in what, again, that changed name too, everything changes, as a diaconal minister. And the reason I love that so much is that nobody really knew what that was, and you got to kind of tell people, this is what I do, and you kind of almost got to invent it, because the church wasn't even really sure what it was. The idea was that you were to merge your work and your theology and do something kind of mission-oriented. I said, perfect, that's exactly what I want to do. It is supposed to be a 2.5-year degree, but because I was doing it part-time online weekends and when I could squeeze it in around a more than full-time pediatric job, it took me from 2003 till 2009 to finish. And then in 2010, I was called to St. Paul as their diaconal minister. Then the church kind of dumped the diaconal ministers, the deaconesses, and this other group called AIMS, which are primarily church musicians and educational staff in churches, dumped us all into one bucket called deacon. So now I am a deacon.
Okay.
But the job that I do has not changed at all. It's really kind of working at the intersection of the church and health. And that has taken on a whole variety of different roles. So the mission to East Africa. So I work actually out of 3 different churches. Elias in Emmitsburg, St. Paul here in Carlisle, and then Christ Lutheran Church in Harrisburg. The Christ Lutheran Church was taken over by the pastor that was called there when I started working there was Reverend Jody Siliker. And she had been sent to that church by the bishop at that time to basically help the church gracefully close. she got there and saw, she had a background in nursing, got there and saw that this could really be a kind of fertile ground for doing mission work in a very poor part of the city. So that is near, it's in the Allison Hill neighborhood. A lot of people of color, immigrants, a whole lot of need. Mm-hmm. And so rather than closing it down, she turned it into this very fertile health ministries, which is what it's currently called, Health Ministries at Christ Lutheran. And I am the medical director there, so I go over there once a week when I do on-call for my practice. Instead of working in the office the next day, half day, I go over there and do a low-risk prenatal clinic. And you might sit and wonder, well, why is a pediatrician doing prenatal care? Well, the OB doctors really can't work outside of the hospital. They are covered by institutional malpractice, and so it only covers them for working in that system, so they can't go out and do these volunteer opportunities like this. And doing a lot of adolescent gynecology through the years, I said, okay, I can kind of, as long as we keep this low risk and I have real OB doctors backing me up, we can do this. So Jody and I kind of formed that clinic, and that started 14 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since. Most of the immigrants that we take care of, so the criterion to come to that clinic are that you can't have any type of insurance, which is very different than any other medical care you will get. We pick up all the people who fall through the cracks in the system. We work in partnership with, again, formerly Holy Spirit Hospital, now Penn State Holy Spirit. That they've gone through all their changes in ownership as well. But at the time that we started this clinic, that was still run by the Sisters of Mercy, and they controlled really what the budget of the hospital was and made sure that that's why there's always been a lot of more mental health care there, because that has a lot of expense and very poor reimbursement for hospital systems, and most of them don't want to have much to do with it. And they also wanted to fund outreach clinics like what we do at Christ Lutheran. Pastor Jody had actually grown up Catholic and felt called to the ordained ministry, so that required a shift into Lutheranism, which you see a lot of recovering Catholics, as we call them, in the Lutheran Church. And so she took great joy, too, of walking into the Roman Catholic hospital with a cleric on. So had a lot of fun with that. But at any rate, so she was well connected to the sisters and helped found what is now the Penn State Holy Spirit Outreach Clinic, which operates out of the basement of the church, and then Christ Lutheran Health Ministries, which includes my prenatal clinic. Dr. Margaret Groff does a drop-in urgent clinic once a week, and Jody got incredible funding, mostly through Blue Cross Blue Shield, Highmark now, to have a dental clinic there. They use volunteer dental hygienists from HAC. They actually do dental clinics during the school year. It gives the HAC students a place to do their required service. So it just has worked out so well. Well funded by other churches as well, because it is such a rich outreach site. So I'll give Pastor Jody credit for ignoring the bishop and saying, no, this is exactly what church should be and should do.
Yeah.
The form my ministry here in Carlisle has taken has been very different. Because of my work over there with a lot of immigrants, I got very tied up in immigrant things, and especially we called a youth minister who is Tanzanian, so I had to walk him all through the religious workers visa process. Moses Kavishe, I'll give a shout out to Moses. And learning about the immigration process and how burdensome and onerous and prolonged and really, really ugly and unfair it is has made me a pretty vigorous advocate for immigrant rights. So I do a lot of that. Back in June of 2019, I believe, when you saw those videos of children getting yanked out of their parents' arms at our southern border, one of our church members stood up and said, we need to do something about this. She stood up after a service and said, everybody who's interested, have a meeting after church. And that was the birth of a team we now call the We Care team. I don't know if you remember, but Melania Trump wore that awful coat that said, I don't care, do you? And so that's where our name came from. We care. And we've worked a lot with Lutheran immigration, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, and continue to do a lot of work around immigration. But then we've also been very open as we've been meeting to the work of the Holy Spirit. So we noticed during a Bible study that we were doing, there was a homeless gentleman sleeping in the little court. Now, if you've ever been to St. Paul, there's a little courtyard that faces onto West Street.
Yeah.
And it has like the entrance into Stock Hall, and it used to be where Project Cheer entrance was and everything. So that's where this gentleman was sleeping. And that led us to have a meeting with Pastor about, what can we do about, providing a space for these homeless people that are using our courtyard for shelter, that they don't have to sleep outside in the elements. He invited us to become involved with the apartment ministry at the church. So I think that kind of segue over to the apartment ministry kind of dates back to Jimmy George being a member of St. Paul, back into the 70s. Those apartments that are attached to St. Paul on West Lowther Street are all owned by the church and have been operated as subsidized housing since the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think that's a well-known fact, but we got involved in that. And it turns out that one building, 221, had fallen into a state of disrepair. There was a while, that apartment ministry started by Jimmy George, all got older and no new replacements came in, and so they became unable to continue. They were actually in there doing all the repair work and all the upkeep and everything. So we tried temporarily using an unnamed management company to run the apartments. It was a disaster. They raised the rents, didn't do any repairs, and after one particularly frustrating event, they fired us, and we were really happy they fired us because then we took it back over again. But it left a whole lot of deferred maintenance, 4 years worth of deferred maintenance, and one building that really is just too slum-like to put people in.
Yeah.
So intersect that whole timeline with the We Care team getting involved with the apartment ministry. One of our members, Gail DuPont, is sitting on the Carlisle Advocacy Network, which is formed kind of primarily through Dickinson, but all the community leaders and all the organizations get together in that. And she learned about community development block grants being offered by the county in the aftermath of the pandemic. So we applied for one of those and were granted close to $400,000 to repair that one building. Thank heaven for the Partnership for Better Health, which was formed after the old nonprofit hospital. All the proceeds were put into that nonprofit, and they do a lot of health-related grant making. They gave us another grant to help repair the other existing apartments and get all that deferred maintenance caught up. So suddenly I find myself now knee-deep in the homelessness and apartment ministry.
Yeah.
Remember what I said about not liking to be bored?
Yeah.
The church job made it even more exciting, but it's all been fabulous and good. So we continue to do all our work around immigration, but now we're tied up in the housing industry and homelessness. And we put out, I don't know if you've seen in that same courtyard, the Giving Tree. We decided to make things available to homeless people in the community that they didn't have to go far from the community care shelter to get. So we just hang out all kinds of things that have been identified by the clients there as needs. And they can just come up to the tree. They're in plastic bags. You could come up to the tree and take what you need off of it. There's everything from food to packages of tissues to socks. During the winter we had gloves, hats, blankets, all kinds of things out there. So we're kind of running all those things now through the We Care team, and and that group of ladies is passionate advocates also for all these things. So I'm blessed to have this team that's working with me and expanding what I could have done on my own so much more bountifully.
Yeah. Well, I should have asked this earlier, but you mentioned that, was it 2003 that you attended this pastoral
care and counseling class.
Yeah. Were you already a member of the Lutheran Church at that point, or was that?
I was one of what they call cradle Lutherans. My grandmother actually immigrated from Norway, and Norway, the Lutheran Church was the state church for Norway at one point in time. So much of Scandinavia was Lutheran. That was just what you were. Yeah. And so she imported that, and that's how I grew up. So I've always been a member of the Lutheran Church.
Okay. So do you also, and you mentioned that you've been involved with 3 ministries. You talked about Harrisburg, Carlisle. Is there anything in Emmitsburg that you're doing as well? Or
Well, Emmitsburg is the one where I do the missions to East Africa.
Okay.
So that's really my sole function with that church, is to help run those missions. And again, it doesn't sound like much to go somewhere for 2 weeks, but the amount of logistics it takes to get a team assembled, get them trained, get all the materials you need, set up all the connections on that end for travel, it's work.
Yeah.
So that can be a pretty big thing in the years that we do that. The pandemic obviously has us pretty shut down at the moment, and we don't know exactly when we'll be back, but it'll happen. I have my son's old bedroom in my house is full of donated supplies. I have minions in several locations that kind of gather. Plastic expires in the United States. Did you know that? So, or you have single-use things that you can't use again, because in our culture that there's a law against reusing an ambu bag. So I go over there and I teach what's called Helping Babies Breathe training, which is where you do just room air, an ambu bag, a mask for babies who are born with a heart rate but not breathing, and you can kickstart them and reduce the infant mortality rate by 9%, just doing something simple like that.
Wow.
So I go over there and I teach the native women, like the village midwives, and they have some kind of very not that well trained EMT style healthcare personnel, and teach them that technique and go around to the villages and do that.
I mean, you may have mentioned this earlier, and I just may have missed it. Where in Kenya?
It's a little town called Kibidini. It's really close to Kitale, north of Eldoret. You have to know your Kenyan geography. But kind of close, it's on the western part, close to the Ugandan border.
Okay. I just, my graduate school work was in international development.
Oh.
I should say my graduate assistant job was with the SUNY Albany Center for National Development, and they had a number of large projects in Kenya. So I met a bunch of Kenyan politicians and parliamentarians, and so they were an interesting group.
Yeah, Joshua Machinga there has been asked to be a member, and he works for some government agencies. Again, his background was also in agriculture and sustainable agriculture as Farmer Pastor John. Yeah. Pastor Farmer John, I'm not sure what order to say that in. But they both have that background in sustainable agriculture. So that technically is Joshua's paying job for the government, is a lot of agricultural jobs. But then he was asked, the site that he was plopped on had land, and so he had a Catholic church actually asked him to build some school buildings and use that as a school. And then when they got other land, he was left with the school buildings and started his school.
Yeah, I imagine too. I mean, actually, you've been involved in Kenya during some interesting years. I mean, with devolution and new constitutions and all sorts of stuff. So I don't know how much you followed that, but
the interesting thing is, it's just like Carlisle, where that stuff can all go on, but it really doesn't impact your day-to-day life. So the Kibanini would be a lot like the Carlisle of Western Kenya. Sure. It's a place a lot of people pass through and know, and Kitale especially is kind of like that. But yeah, the day-to-day life there hasn't changed. It's a rural farming community. I joke with everybody. I have a picture in my office, and the kids will all know this. I have a picture of a giraffe. It's taken on a mountain, and you see down into a valley in the background. And if you didn't have the giraffe in the foreground, you wouldn't know that you weren't looking at a picture taken off of Flat Rock in Newville. It looks just the same. It's a lot of farmland, a lot of corn growing. My joke is that, I went halfway around the world, and I got off the airplane, and it was Newville, except the Amish people turned black. That's all. So,
well,
we share on this planet. We share a whole lot more than people understand.
Yeah.
We are all the same people, trying to just survive and be happy.
Well, I mean, you've talked quite a bit about sort of the impact that the various ministries have had. I'm wondering, is there anything else that you want to mention about, or that?
I've dabbled here in Carlisle in nursing home ministry. I find that sad because at the end of the day, your ministry dies because all the people die.
Yeah.
So that's not really what I'm cut out for, and I don't think I'll take on any more of that going forward. I'll kind of make a tribute here to Diane Harper, who was instrumental into getting us we did a spiritual support group at Forest Park Nursing Home. And that was a fantastic group of people too. And one by one, they just all blinked out. And
Yeah, I imagine that's a very different mindset you have to have as compared to
Yeah.
sort of pediatric and adolescence where, you know.
Yes and no. I find myself very comfortable in a dementia unit because in a dementia unit, it's a lot like working with a group of 2- and 3-year-olds.
Well, I'm just thinking, I mean, but you're not able to build that sort of
Right,
relationship.
there's nothing longitudinal, and it's always going to end, and it was sad.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what are some of the other things that you enjoy about living here in Cumberland County?
I mentioned the fact that I really enjoy the outdoors and nature, and since the pandemic and social distancing, I've been reacquainting myself with state parks and local parks and things like that. Just a couple of days ago, I went over and hiked around Wildwood Lake, which is a three-mile circuit, and it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
It takes you about 2.5 hours to do that because there's a lot of up and down on the eastern border of the lake. So. And I love to do photography, so I take my camera over there and do that. Went to Fort Hunter, hadn't been to Fort Hunter since my son was little. I said, what happened to me? I just stopped going to all these outdoor things. I got so wrapped up with doing degrees online and practicing medicine and organizing all these other things. I went up to Little Buffalo last year for the first time in a long time. Pennsylvania has so much to offer in great outdoor spaces, and it's not hard to social distance around here, so I still love the Carlisle area for that. You can just do a lot of things that you love.
I'm trying to think back to my interview with Dr. Rosario, and he was also interested in photography, wasn't he?
Yes.
Is that something that...
Yes, and he and I have always dabbled in that. He obviously, being retired, has a whole lot more time to do it, and he's at Wildwood Lake all the time. We share that passion.
Now, is that a coincidence, or do you find a lot of doctors? Because I'm trying to think, there was a doctor in Boiling Springs who I think was also a big photographer. I'm blanking on the name.
And I'm not coming up with that. I don't think that's a real common one. I think there are a lot of physicians involved with the arts. One of my other sidelines is to do acrylic pouring and acrylic art, thought mandalas. I'll try any medium and see how much I like it. So I'm just doing art. You have to have something like that to balance the heavy left-brainedness that goes into the medical world, which is, all based. There's the relationship part, but there's also the heavy science part of it that you always have to keep running in the background.
Yeah.
And if you just did that, you'd just get too narrow. So I really like having more of the right brain artsy stuff going on at the same time. Keeps me sane. And again, you know me, don't want to be bored.
Yeah. Well, I imagine too that, I mean, that's, photography, and I imagine being outdoors, I mean, that makes it a little bit easier to engage that photography aspect as well.
I enjoy nature photography. Dr. Rosario really enjoys birds. I mean, so a lot of his stuff focuses around birds. I'll take pictures more of plants. And I like, my gig with photography is for still photography for things that don't move. I like to look at aspects of that thing that nobody else would even notice, like walking by, like the underside of a mushroom, the very deep insides of a plant.
Now, is a lot of your photography based here in the county, or is it a little bit more?
I would say most of my photography would be based here in the county. It's things in my own yard or at all the state parks that I can see.
I'll just mention, we have a large photo archive that we're always looking for more stuff, so if you ever
we'll talk more later about that.
All right, so you also mentioned here that the acrylic pouring. Is that, how did you find yourself doing some of these other artistic pursuits?
We're all minor experts on things via YouTube, so I just happened to watch a YouTube video and I thought, ooh, that looks like fun. So I bought some of the materials, and the next thing you know, you kind of do the next thing and the next thing, and all of a sudden, my entire, what's called a formal dining room is now consumed by art supplies. So, yeah, that was just one of those, almost like a little disease that grew. And I will not claim to be fabulous at it, but it
Sure.
did make me join the Carlisle Arts Learning Center. Another thing I appreciate about Carlisle is the arts community and all the opportunities you have to explore.
Mhm.
I've taken photography classes there and done pottery workshops. I'm not very good at wheel-thrown pottery. That is like, I'm really horrible at that, actually. You learn what you're not good at sometimes, too.
Sure.
But yeah, there's arts here too. I mean, and courtesy of Dickinson College, you've got the big international community, you've got the War College.
Mhm.
I mean, Carlisle is just this fabulous place with a whole lot of stuff going on.
You mentioned, I believe, that your daughter was also really interested in art and design. Is that
Mhm.
something that she picked up from you, or did you pick up it from her?
I always did the photography and art when I was younger. I think it's maybe more genetic.
Okay.
I think she just gravitated to the same kinds of things that I've always been interested in.
Hmm.
And even my son has that art bug. He discovered woodworking. Now that echoes up from my maternal grandfather and from my own father. They both enjoyed a lot of woodworking. He is phenomenally good at it. He does inlay work. He has all these exotic woods. He has made himself this custom desk that is just gorgeous. And then from there he branched out into leatherworking. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, we all have that. The whole family, I think, has this massive artsy streak in it too.
Well, so just kind of, wrapping things up a little bit. You've been here now since, I believe you said 85.
Correct.
So how has Carlisle and the county changed, or has it not changed as much as you think it would have?
It's grown in some very fabulous ways. The Arts Learning Center was not there earlier. The parks have always been here, so those I've enjoyed the whole time. I remember when town ended, our medical office is right there at the intersection of Walnut Bottom Road and 81.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the two gas stations on the other side of 81 from our office. Town ended there. There was nothing out that way. And now you've got that whole corridor full of businesses and medical offices, and the hospitals out there now. So I've watched that growth there. Developments popping up all over the place to the point that I worry a little about where is our farmland all going.
Yeah.
So it's changed, in good and bad ways. It's grown a lot, and more things still to do that I enjoy.
Well, we have the Historical Society, I should say, has the 2 Mile House out on Walnut Bottom, and it's amazing to look at photographs of what
That used
the
to be.
area used to look like
Right, it was
and
in
what
the
it
middle
looks
of
like
nowhere
now.
all by itself.
Yeah.
And that has been consumed. So, yeah, I watched that all go on.
Well, I'm wondering, have you noticed any demographic shifts, or you talked a little bit about immigration. I know there have been a few.
For me, it's really hard to know if the immigrant communities here, I know, we have a huge Bosnian immigrant community,
Mhm.
and it happens that way because I've studied immigration now. You get one family, and then they bring their family, and the next thing you know,
Sure.
you've got a lot of people from that town, and so you kind of pop up little immigrant communities that way. I'm sure that's how the German settlers who originally came here, I'm sure that's how it happened then. The immigration has never really changed. It's just different people who look and sound different across the years, but it's always the same thing. We have a Somali community here, a Latino community. So we have our immigrant community still, and slowly but surely they kind of get adapted to the area, and
Well, I'm wondering, I know one thing that, we talk about a lot, or we did a few years ago, was sort of what the downtown. I'm wondering, what was the downtown like when you first moved here?
There were different businesses. Businesses come and go.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic, I think, has affected this a lot more than the preceding years. I mean, because, eateries come and go, and, storefronts, the niche markets come and go. I think it did a world of good to change it from 4 lanes of traffic to 2 lanes with the bicycle and parking lane.
Yeah.
That was phenomenal. I think that was one of the better moves that the borough ever made, because it makes it much more user-friendly to be downtown. Ditto for the newer parking meters. I think that's really bringing us up to speed with places like, bigger cities like Pittsburgh and places like that. So, I see all that as positive development that would attract more people to come to the downtown area.
I'm wondering, what do your kids think of the road diet? The road diet, that switching of 4 lanes to 2 lanes.
I'm not sure either of them comes back and spends enough time in Carlisle to have a whole lot of thinking about that. My daughter was more impressed with all the renovations we did over in St. Paul, because we took out what used to be really ugly, that 70s olive green carpeting with all the multi-level thing going on in it, and put in a very nice, we took out the dropped ceiling and opened back up the, what is now, what used to be called the parlor. It's now a nice meeting space with updated flooring and its own separate kitchen. And
because I was, I've only been in St. Paul once or twice, and it was for the Hope Station sort of kids group, or teenage after school group. We did some interviews with them. And it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and we've always used the church. That's one of the things I've really enjoyed about St. Paul, is we've tried to make it available and useful to neighborhood groups. So you have AA and a men's and Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and Hope Station activities, and tried to be really in the neighborhood, working with the neighborhood, and making the space something that is usable and beneficial, not just a Sunday place, but 7 days a week, somebody's in there doing something from the community as well.
The reason I asked about the road diet is, I think I came to Carlisle once before the road diet, and I really didn't remember it. But
because it was so easy to just pass through and hard to park.
Maybe. Well, I mean, I was going to Dickinson, so I don't know how much, it was just, pretty brief. But I've lived here now for, only having known with the 2 lanes. But the vitriol that some, longtime residents have for, it's so terrible, it blows my mind. So I didn't know if that was just like a local, people who, have lived elsewhere, they just have like a different appreciation for a functional road, I guess. I don't know.
For me, it made it less attractive for tractor trailer traffic to pass through downtown. And, it made it more of a place to stop and stay. Yeah. And I think that was a good change. But I'm sure there are people who probably work with the trucking industry or transportation industry.
Or who just wanted to,
or want to beeline through and be done with it. Yeah.
So I
think I made it much more inviting, I guess is the word I would use.
Yeah. All right, and I always end by asking if there's anything that I missed that I didn't ask, or that you want to mention before we stop.
I really don't think so. I think we have covered everything that I could think about being in Carlisle for all these years, and then some things I had never even thought to mention. I just want to express my appreciation for the Historical Society for doing this kind of an oral history project, and for forcing me to think about my whole life perspective as I'm kind of approaching retirement. That's kind of been an interesting exercise.
Well,
for me.
We can also thank Terry and
Terry Rouse, yes, Dr. Rosario's new wife. She's a phenomenal human being. I'm not sure how he managed to marry 2 such phenomenal women in his life. Yeah.
Well, probably says something about him. So we'll go with that.
And I just give thanks to the Carlisle community for being the place that it is, that through the years that it is thought to try to make itself into what it really is, which is an attractive place for people to live and work.
All right. Well, thank you again for speaking with me today, and for sharing your stories.
Thank you for having me.